Darkly Dreaming Dexter, Chapter 15. It was the static of his radio that gave him away. I was deeply involved in something I had never tried before, but when I heard it, I was working on the torso with the knife point and could feel the first real tinglings of response down my spine and through my legs. I didn't want to stop, but a radio. This was worse news than a mere guard arriving. If he called for backup or to have the road blocked, it would just possible that I might find a few of the things that I had been doing a little difficult to explain. I looked down at Jaworski. He was nearly done now, and yet not. I was yet not nearly happy with how things had gone. Far too much a mess, and I had not really found what I was looking for. There had been a few moments where I felt on the brink of some wonderful thing, something amazing, some revelation to do with what? The water flowing by was outside the window, but it had not happened, whatever it had been. Now I was left with an unfinished, unclean, untidy, unsatisfying child rapist and a security guard on his way to join us. I hate to rush the conclusion. It's such an important moment and a real relief for both of us, the dark passenger and I. But what choice did I have for a long moment? Far too long, really, and I'm quite ashamed. I thought about killing the guard and going on. It would be easy, and I could continue to explore with fresh start, but no. But no, of course not. I wouldn't do it. The guard was innocent as anyone can be, and still live in Miami. He'd probably done nothing worse than shoot at other drivers on the Palmetto Expressway a few times. Practically Snow White. No. I had to make a hasty retreat, and that was all there was to it. And if I had to leave the janitor not quite finished and me not quite satisfied, well, better luck next time. I stared down at the grubby little insect and felt myself fill with loathing. The thing was drooling snot and blood all together, the ugly wet slop burbling across his face. A trickle of awful red came from his mouth. In a quick fit of pique, I slashed across Jaworski's throat. I immediately regretted my rashness. A fountain of horrible blood came out, and the sight made it all seem even more regrettable. A messy mistake. Feeling unclean and unsatisfied, I sprinted for the stairwell. A cold and petulant grumble from my dark passenger followed me. I turned out onto the second floor and slid sideways over onto glassless windows. Below me, I could see the guard's golf cart parked, pointing in the direction of Old Cutler, meaning, I hoped, that he'd come from the other direction and had not seen my car. Standing beside the cart, a fat, olive-skinned young man with black hair and wispy mustache was looking up at the building, luckily looking at the other end at the moment. What had he heard? Was he merely on his regular route? I had to hope so. If he had actually heard something, if he stood outside and called for help, I was probably going to be caught. And as clever and glib-tongued as I was, I did not think that I was good enough to walk my way out of this. The young guard touched a thumb down to his mustache and stroked it as if to encourage fuller growth. He frowned, swept his gaze along the front of the building. I ducked back. When I peeked out again a moment later, I could just see the top of his head. He was coming in. I waited until I heard his feet in the stairwell. Then I was out the window, halfway between the first and second floors, hanging by my fingertips from the coarse cement of the windowsill, then dropping. I hit badly, one ankle twisting on the rock, one knuckle skinned, but in my very best rapid limp I hurried to the shadows and scurried for my car. My heart was pounding when I finally slid into the driver's seat. I looked back and saw no sign of the guard. I started the engine, and with the lights still off, I drove away as quickly as I could, out Old Cutler Road, heading towards South Miami and taking the long way home along Dixie Highway, my pulse still pounding in my ears. What a stupid risk to take. I'd never done anything so impulsive. Never before anything at all without careful planning. That was the Harry way. Be careful. Be safe. Be prepared. The Dark Scouts. And instead, this. I could have been caught. I could have been seen. Stupid! If I had not heard the young security guard in time, I might not have had to kill him. Kill an innocent man with violence. I was quite sure Harry would disapprove. And it was so messy and unpleasant, too. Of course, I was still not safe. The guard might easily have written down my license number if he had passed my car in the little golf cart. I had taken brainless, terrible risks, gone against all my careful procedures, gambled my entire carefully built life. And for what? A thrill kill? Shame on me. And deep in the shaded corner of my mind, the echo came, oh yes, shame. In the familiar chuckle. I took a deep breath and looked at my hand on the steering wheel. But it had been thrilling, hadn't it? It had been wildly exciting, full of life and new sensations and profound frustration. It had been going entirely new and interesting, and the odd sensation that it was all going somewhere, an important place that was new and not yet familiar. I would have really liked to explore that little bit a lot better next time. Not that there was going to be a next time, of course. I would certainly never do anything so foolish and impulsive. Never. But to have done it once, kind of fun. Never mind. I would go home and take an exceptionally long shower, and by the time I was done, time. It came into my mind, unwanted and unasked. I agreed to meet with Rita at right about now. According to my dashboard clock, and for what dark purpose, I couldn't know what went on in the human female mind. Why did I even have to think about for what at a time like this, when all my nerve endings were standing up and yodeling with frustration? I did not care that Rita wanted to yell at me about it. It would not really bother me, whatever sharp observations she had to make on my character defects, but it was irritating to be forced to spend time listening when I had the other, far more important things to think about. Most particularly, I wanted to wonder what I should have done had I not done with dear departed Jaworski. Upon the cruelly interrupted and unfinished climax, so many new things had happened that needed my very best mental efforts. I needed to reflect, to consider, and to understand where it all had been leading me. And how did it relate to the other artists out there shadowing me and challenging me with his work? With all this to think about, why did I need Rita right now? But of course, I would go, and of course, it would eventually serve some humble purpose if I should need an alibi for my adventures with the little janitor. Why, detective? How could you possibly think that besides, I was having a fight with my girlfriend at the time. Ex-girlfriend, actually. Because there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that Rita merely wanted to. What was the word we were using lately? Vent? Yes. Rita wanted me to come over so she could vent on me. I had certain major character flaws that she needed to point out with an accompanying burst of emotion, and my presence was necessary. Since this was the case, I took on an extra minute to clean up. I circled back towards Coconut Grove and parked on the far side of the bridge on the waterway. A good deep channel ran underneath. I rolled a couple of large coral rocks out of the trees at the edge of the waterway, stuffed them in my tote bag, which was loaded with the plastic, gloves, and my knife, and flung the thing into the center of the channel. I stopped once more at a small, dark park almost to Rita's house and washed off carefully. I had to be neat and presentable. Getting yelled at by a furious woman should be treated as a semi-formal occasion. But imagine my surprise when I rang her doorbell a few minutes later. She did not fling the door wide open and begin to hurl furniture and abuse at me. In fact, she was opening the door very slowly and carefully, half hiding behind it, as if badly frightened of what might be waiting for her on the other side. And considering that frightened of what might be waiting on the other side, and considering it was me waiting, this showed rare common sense. "Dexter," she said, softly, shyly, sounding like she wasn't sure whether she wanted me to answer yes or no. "I didn't think you were coming." "And yet here I am," I said helpfully. She didn't answer for a much longer time than seemed right. Finally, she nudged the door slightly more open and said, "Will you come in, please?" And of her certain limping tone of voice, unlike I had ever heard her use before, was a surprise. Imagine how astonished I was by her costume. I believe the thing was called a peignoir, or possibly it was a negligee, since it certainly was negligible as far as the amount of fabric used and its construction was concerned. Whatever the correct name, she was certainly wearing it. And as bizarre as the idea was, I believe the costume was aimed at me. "Please," she repeated. It was all a little much. I mean, really, what was I supposed to do here? I was bubbling over with unsatisfied experimentation on the janitor. There were still unhappy murmurings filtering from the back seat, and a quick check of the situation at large revealed I was being whispered between dear Deb and the dark artist, and now I was expected to do some of human thing here? Like, well, what, after all? Surely she couldn't want, she was mad at me. What was going on here? And why was it going on with me? "I sent the kids next door," Rita said. She bumped into the door with her hip. I went in. I can think of a great many ways to describe what happened next, but none of them seem adequate. She went to the couch. I followed. She sat down. So did I. She looked uncomfortable and squeezed her left hand with her right. She seemed to be waiting for something, and since I was not quite sure what, I found myself thinking about my unfinished work with Jaworski. If I had only a little bit more time, the things I might have done. And as I thought of some of those things, I became aware that Rita had quietly started to cry. I stared at her for a moment, trying to suppress the images of a flayed and bloodless janitor. For the life of me, I could not understand why she was crying, but since I had practiced long and hard at imitating human beings, I knew that I was supposed to comfort her. I leaned towards her and put my arm across her. "Rita," I said. There. Not really a line worthy of me, but it was well thought out by many experts, and it was effective. Rita lunged forward and leaned her face into my chest. I tightened my arm around her, which brought my hand back into view. Less than an hour ago, the same hand had been holding a fillet knife over the little janitor. The thought made me dizzy, and I really don't know how it happened, but it did. One moment I was patting her and saying, there, and staring at the cords in my hand, feeling the sense memory pulse through my fingers, and the surge of power and brightness as the knife explored Jaworski's abdomen. In the next moment, I believed Rita looked up at me. I'm so reasonably certain that I looked back. And yet somehow it was not Rita I saw, but a neat stack of cool and bloodless limbs. And it was not Rita's hands I felt on my belt buckle, but the rising, unsatisfied chorus from the dark passenger. And some little time later, well, it's still somewhat unthinkable. I mean, right there on the couch. How on earth did that happen? By the time I climbed into my little bed, I was thoroughly whipped. I don't ordinarily require a great deal of sleep, but I felt as though tonight might need a nice solid 36 hours. The ups and downs of the evening, the strain of so much new experience that had all been draining. More draining for Jaworski, of course, the nasty little wet thing. But I had used all my adrenaline for the month. And this one impetuous evening, I could not even begin to think of what any of it meant. From the strange impulse to fly out into the night so madly and rashly, all the way through the unthinkable things that had happened with Rita. I had left her asleep and apparently much happier. But poor dark deranged Dexter without a clue once again. And when my head hit the pillow, I fell asleep most instantly. And there I was, out over the city like a boneless bird, flowing and swift. The cold air moved around me and drew on me, pulled down to where the moonlight rippled on the water, and I slash into the tight, cold, killing room where the little janitor looks up at me and laughs, spread-eagled under the knife and laughing, and the effort of it contorts his face, changes it, and now he is not Jaworski anymore, but a woman, and the man holding the knife up to where I float above with the whirling red viscera, and the face comes up. I can hear Harry outside the door, and I turn just before I can see who is on the table, but I woke up. The pain in my head would split a cantaloupe. I felt like I had hardly closed my eyes, but the bedside clock said it was 5:14. Another dream, long distant, a call on my phantom party line. No wonder I had steadfastly refused to have dreams for most of my life. So stupid, such pointless, obvious symbols. Totally controllable, anxiety soup, hateful, blatant nonsense. And now I could get back to sleep thinking of the infantile images. If I had to dream, why couldn't it be more like me? Interesting and different. I sat up and rubbed my throbbing temples. Terrible, Tedious, unconsciousness dripped away like a draining sinus, and I sat on the edge of the bed, bleary with befuddlement. What was happening to me? And why couldn't it happen to somebody else? This dream had felt different, and I wasn't surely what the difference was or what was about to happen. And even knew where, but this time I sighed and padded into the kitchen for a drink of water. Barbie's head went as I opened the refrigerator. I stood and watched, sipping as a large glass of cold water. The bright blue eyes stared back at me, unblinking. Why had I had a dream? Was it just to strain the last evening's adventures, playing back from my battered subconscious? I had never felt such strain before. Actually, it had always been a release of strain. Of course, I never come so close to disaster before either. But why dream about it? Some of the images were too painfully obvious. Jaworski and Harry in the unseen face of the man with the knife. Really now. Why bother me with stuff from freshman psychology? Here I was in the kitchen playing with a Barbie doll. I flipped the head again. For that matter, what was a Barbie all about? And how was I going to figure this out in time to rescue Deborah's career? How could I get around LaGuerta when the poor thing was so taken with me? And by all that was holy, if anything actually was, why Rita needed to do that to me. It seemed suddenly like a twisted soap opera. It was far too much. I found some aspirin and leaned against the kitchen counter and ate 3 of them. I didn't much care for the taste. I had never liked medicine of any kind, except in a utilitarian way, especially since Harry died.